Subscribe to Infidelity Tales Lab for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. Marcus Bryant stood in the workshop at 2 a.m., his hands steady as he welded the final joint on a custom steel railing. The orange sparks illuminated his face, highlighting the dark circles under his eyes. He hadn't slept properly in weeks, but tonight was different. Tonight, he worked because he wanted to, not because he was avoiding home. There was no home to avoid anymore. The divorce papers had been served 3 months ago, and today, technically was the final hearing. Melissa wanted everything. Not half. Everything. The business, the house, the savings, even his late father's workshop tools. Her lawyer, Carlton Simmons, had filed papers claiming Marcus had contributed nothing of value to the marriage or the business. That Marcus' steel and design was built on family money, her family's money. It was an impressive lie. Marcus removed his welding helmet and examined the railing. Perfect as always. He'd started this business 8 years ago with $3,000, a rented garage, and skills his father taught him before cancer took him. Every piece of equipment, every contract, every dollar he'd earned it with his hands and his mind. He thought back to how it started. Fresh out of a technical college, working 3 jobs, sleeping 4 hours a night. He'd met Melissa Davidson back then at a gallery opening where his first major piece was displayed. A sculptural staircase that had taken him 6 months to design and build. She'd been charming, interested in his work, supportive of his dreams. Or so he'd thought. Marcus always had such wonderful dreams, she told friends at their wedding. I can't wait to help him achieve them. She'd helped, in her way. Melissa had a business degree and offered to handle the administrative side while he focused on design and fabrication. It seemed perfect. He'd given her access to accounts, made her a partner on paper, trusted her with everything. The betrayal hadn't been sudden. Looking back, Marcus could see the signs he'd missed. Small things at first: Melissa questioning his decisions, suggesting they hire managers, pushing him to step back from the creative process. Her mother, Gloria Davidson, had moved to town 2 years into the marriage, and that's when things truly shifted. Gloria was old money, or at least she acted like it. Her family had owned a successful textile business decades ago, sold it before the industry collapsed. She'd lived off that money ever since, never working a day, and she'd raised Melissa with the same entitled expectations. To Gloria, Marcus was beneath her daughter, a craftsman, a manual laborer who got his hands dirty. Melissa could have married Benjamin Lowe, Gloria had said once, not bothering to lower her voice at a family dinner. A lawyer from a good family. Instead, she's watching her husband play with metal in a garage. Marcus had ignored it then. He'd ignored a lot of things. The real problem started 18 months ago. Melissa had come home from lunch with her mother and announced she wanted to rebrand the business. Hire a new designer. Make Marcus just the CEO, the face of the company, who didn't actually create anything anymore. You've taken it as far as you can with your skills, she'd said, her voice sweet with condescension. We need to bring in real talent to reach the next level. Real talent. As if the 50 commission pieces, the features in architectural magazines, the waiting list of clients meant nothing. Marcus had refused. It was his art, his vision, his life's work. The argument had been spectacular. Melissa had cried, accused him of not trusting her business judgment, of being controlling. Gloria had called him ungrateful, reminded him that Melissa had sacrificed her own career to help him. What career? Melissa had worked as an office manager for 6 months before they married. She quit the moment Marcus's business started showing profit. After that fight, Melissa changed. She became cold, calculating. She started documenting everything, taking photos of their home, keeping receipts, building a narrative. Marcus saw it happening but didn't understand why until the divorce papers arrived. The claim was simple and devastating. Melissa had funded the business with her inheritance. Marcus had contributed nothing but basic labor. She deserved the company, the assets, everything. Her lawyer had somehow produced documents showing money transfers, investment records, even contracts with her name listed as primary owner. Marcus's lawyer, Bernard McIntyre, was good but overwhelmed. They've been planning this for a long time, Bernard had said at their first meeting, his weathered face grim. These documents, some of them go back years. Did you sign anything without reading it? Marcus had signed plenty. He'd trusted his wife. That trust now looked like stupidity. The preliminary hearings had been brutal. Carlton Simmons was a shark, expensive, ruthless, and very good at his job. He painted Marcus as a manual laborer who got lucky, a man who couldn't have possibly built a multi-million-dollar business without his wife's financial backing and business acumen. Mr. Bryant is a talented welder, Carlton had said in one hearing, his voice dripping with contempt. But welding and running a company are very different skills. Miss Davidson provided the capital, the business strategy, and the connections that made Marcus Steele and Design successful. Melissa sat beside her lawyer, nodding with practiced sadness, playing the role of a woman who'd given everything to an ungrateful husband. Gloria sat behind her, eyes sharp with triumph. Marcus had wanted to shout, to rage, to demand they prove any of it, but Bernard had counseled patience. Let them think they're winning, Bernard had said. We'll get our chance. That chance was in 8 hours. Marcus locked up the workshop and drove through empty streets to the small apartment he'd rented after moving out of his house that he'd bought with his own money, though that was apparently up for debate now. He showered, put on the suit Bernard had insisted on, and made coffee he didn't drink. At 5 a.m., his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Good luck today. You'll need it. M. Melissa. Still twisting the knife. Marcus deleted the text and picked up the manila envelope sitting on his kitchen table. It was thick, stuffed with documents he'd been compiling for months. Evidence that would change everything. He'd spent the last 3 months doing what he did best, building something carefully, precisely, with perfect attention to detail. But this time, he wasn't building art. He was building a case. A trap. Bernard didn't even know half of what was in this envelope. Marcus had kept it close, worked on it alone, verified every detail. Because if there was one thing 8 years of running a business had taught him, it was this: documentation beats lies. Facts beat fiction, and patience beats panic. Melissa and Gloria thought they'd been clever. They'd forged documents, manipulated records, built a false narrative. They'd assumed Marcus was too trusting, too focused on his work to notice the details. They'd assumed wrong. The courthouse was busy even at 8:30 a.m. Marcus arrived early and found Bernard waiting outside the courtroom, looking nervous. You ready? Bernard asked. More than ready. Marcus patted the envelope. This is everything we need. Marcus, I should review. Trust me, Bernard. I've checked everything twice. They entered the courtroom. Melissa was already there with Carlton and Gloria. Melissa wore a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than Marcus's rent. Her blonde hair styled perfectly, her expression composed. She looked like the victim she was pretending to be. Gloria sat behind her, dressed in black like she was attending a funeral. In a way, she was. Just not Marcus's. When Melissa's eyes met Marcus's, she smiled. Not a warm smile, a satisfied smile. The smile of someone who thought they'd already won. Carlton Simmons approached Bernard. Counselor, my client is prepared to be generous. Mr. Bryant can keep his tools, and perhaps a small cash settlement. We'll waive alimony claims if he signs the business over cleanly. We'll present our case to the judge, Bernard replied stiffly. Suit yourself, but you're fighting a losing battle. Carlton's confidence was absolute. Judge Richard Morrison entered, and everyone rose. Morrison was in his early 60s, a no-nonsense jurist with a reputation for fairness and a deep dislike of liars. Marcus had researched him carefully. Please be seated, Morrison said. I've reviewed the preliminary findings and both party submissions. This is a final hearing for property division in the divorce of Melissa Davidson Bryant and Marcus Bryant. Miss Davidson's counsel, you may proceed. Carlton stood, straightening his expensive suit. Your Honor, this case is straightforward. Miss Davidson invested her personal inheritance, approximately $200,000, into her husband's business venture. She provided strategic guidance, business connections, and administrative expertise that transformed a small welding operation into Marcus Steel and Design, now valued at approximately $8 million. Mr. Bryant, while talented with his hands, contributed primarily physical labor. The business exists because of Miss Davidson's financial and intellectual contributions. We have extensive documentation proving her investments and ownership stake. He presented a stack of papers to the judge. Contracts, transfer records, investment documents, all carefully forged over the past 2 years. Morrison reviewed them without expression. Mr. McIntyre? Bernard stood, less polished but determined. Your Honor, Mr. Bryant built this business from nothing with his own capital, skill, and vision. The documents presented by opposing counsel are suspect, and we have evidence that contradicts their claims. Mr. Bryant founded Marcus Steel and Design with $3,000 he'd saved from working multiple jobs. Every major piece, every important design, every client relationship, he built it all. Do you have documentation? Morrison asked. Some, Your Honor. But much of the early business was cash-based, and Mr. Bryant admits he was not meticulous about record-keeping in the first years. He trusted his wife to handle administration. Carlton smiled. And therein lies the problem, Your Honor. Mr. Bryant has no proof of his claims. My client has extensive documentation. The evidence speaks for itself. Morrison looked at Marcus. Mr. Bryant, did you contribute financially to starting this business? Marcus stood. Yes, Your Honor. $3,000 I'd saved, plus I used equipment my father left me when he died. The initial investment was all mine. Can you prove the $3,000? I have the withdrawal record from my bank account, dated 8 years ago. But Your Honor, I have something else. Marcus held up the manila envelope. With your permission, I'd like to submit this evidence. Carlton's smile faltered slightly. Your Honor, we weren't notified of additional evidence. It's all legal, Your Honor. Bernard interjected quickly. Personal records and documentation Mr. Bryant compiled himself. We're happy to have opposing counsel review it. Morrison considered. Approach the bench. Both lawyers walked forward with Marcus. He handed the envelope to the judge. Morrison opened it, pulled out the first document, and began reading. His eyebrows rose. He read another page, then another. The silence stretched. Marcus watched Melissa's confident expression begin to crack. Gloria leaned forward, whispering to her daughter. Finally, Morrison looked up. Mr. Simmons, you're going to want to see this. Carlton took the documents, started reading, and his face went pale. He flipped through pages faster, his confidence evaporating with each one. Your Honor, Carlton said weakly, I need time to review. We'll take a 30-minute recess. Morrison said. All parties remain available. Mr. Simmons, I suggest you consult with your client. His tone made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. Morrison left the bench. Carlton grabbed the documents and rushed to Melissa and Gloria. Marcus watched as Carlton spread papers on their table and began explaining in urgent whispers. Melissa's face went from confident to confused to horrified. Gloria's expression twisted with rage. Their whispered argument grew heated enough that the bailiff glanced their way. Bernard pulled Marcus aside. What the hell is in there? Marcus allowed himself a small smile. The truth. 30 minutes later, they reconvened. Melissa looked shaken. Gloria looked furious. Carlton looked like a man who just realized he'd bet everything on a losing hand. Morrison returned to the bench. Before we proceed, I want to confirm some facts. Mr. Bryant, you claim you compiled this evidence yourself? Yes, Your Honor. And it's all legally obtained? Yes, Your Honor. Bank records from my own accounts, business documents I retained copies of, communication records from email accounts I controlled, security footage from my workshop which I own, and audio recordings from my home and vehicle which are legal in this state with single-party consent. Melissa's head snapped up. Audio recordings. Marcus saw the moment she understood. Morrison nodded. Miss Davidson, your attorney has reviewed the evidence. Do you wish to revise any of your claims? Carlton stood quickly. Your Honor, my client maintains. I asked Miss Davidson. Morrison's voice was sharp. Melissa stood slowly. I need to consult with my attorney. You've had 30 minutes. Yes or no? Do you wish to revise your claims? The courtroom was silent. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. No. Melissa finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't. Very well. Morrison picked up the first document. Let's begin with this bank record from 8 years ago. Mr. Bryant, this shows a withdrawal of $3,000 from your personal savings account dated June 15th, 8 years ago. The notation says, business startup. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor. And this next document is your father's will, showing you inherited his workshop equipment, tools, and a small work truck, all of which you used to start your business. Correct? Yes, Your Honor. Morrison continued, methodically working through the evidence. Business receipts from the first year, all showing Marcus as the sole proprietor. Client contracts with his signature alone. Then came the devastating parts. Now, this document is interesting, Morrison said, holding up a paper. It's a bank record, showing a transfer of $50,000 from Miss Davidson to her mother, Gloria Davidson, dated 3 years ago. Miss Davidson, can you explain this transfer? Melissa's face went white. That was a loan to my mother. Did she repay it? Silence. Your Honor, Carlton interjected. I failed to see the relevance. The relevance, Counselor, is that Miss Davidson claims she invested $200,000 of her inheritance into her husband's business. Yet here's a $50,000 transfer to her mother. Here's another for $30,000. Here's a $45,000 purchase of a luxury car. In total, I see transfers and purchases totaling approximately $180,000, none of which went to Marcus Steel and Design. So where exactly did this claimed business investment come from? Carlton said nothing. Melissa stared at the table. Morrison continued. But what's truly fascinating is this next set of documents. Mr. Bryant has provided emails between Miss Davidson and her mother, dating back 2 years. Let me read one, dated January 10th, 2 years ago. Miss Davidson writes, Mom, you were right. I need to position myself to take the business when I'm ready. Marcus is so focused on his work. He doesn't notice what I'm changing in the documents. I've already modified 3 client contracts to list myself as primary contact. When the time comes, I'll have everything I need. The courtroom erupted. The few spectators gasped. Carlton looked like he might be sick. Melissa's face was crimson. Your Honor, Carlton tried. Email can be faked, which is why Mr. Bryant provided access to the original email server, which I had our IT specialist verify this morning. They're genuine. Would you like me to read more? There are dozens. Miss Davidson and Mrs. Davidson discussing how to forge investment documents, how to manipulate business records, how to manufacture a narrative that Miss Davidson was the true owner. There's even discussion of hiring a specific lawyer, you, Mr. Simmons, because of your reputation for aggressive asset seizure. Carlton sat down heavily. But wait, Morrison said, and Marcus could swear he saw the judge fighting a smile. It gets better. Mr. Bryant also submitted audio recordings. Minnesota is a one-party consent state, and Mr. Bryant was present for all these recordings, making them legal. In one, recorded in the marital home 6 months ago. Miss Davidson and Mrs. Davidson discussed their plan explicitly. Would the court like to hear it? No, Melissa said quickly. No, please. I think we should, Morrison said. He nodded to the bailiff, who set up an audio player. Melissa's voice came through the speakers, clear and damning. Mother, Marcus is such an idiot. He actually thinks I love him. When we're done, he'll have nothing. The business will be mine, the house will be mine, and he'll go back to being a nobody welder in some garage. Carlton said with the documents we've created. There's no way Marcus can fight it. Gloria's voice responded. Good. He never deserved you. Once you have the business, we'll sell it and you can find a real husband. Someone from a proper family. Melissa's laugh. God, remember when he proposed? With that cheap ring? I should have known then he'd never amount to anything without my help. The recording stopped. The silence was deafening. Melissa was crying now, but they weren't sympathetic tears. She looked trapped, desperate. Gloria's face was stone, her eyes filled with hate as she stared at Marcus. Morrison set down his papers. Miss Davidson, you've committed perjury in my courtroom. You've presented forged documents. You've attempted to defraud your husband of his life's work. Mrs. Davidson, you've conspired in this fraud. He turned to Carlton. Mr. Simmons, did you know these documents were forged? Carlton stood, his voice shaking. Your Honor, I relied on my client's representations. I had no knowledge. I believe you, Counselor. But you'll want to distance yourself from this client immediately. Carlton nodded, looking relieved. Morrison looked at Marcus. Mr. Bryant, I'm prepared to rule. But first, is there anything else? Marcus stood. Just one more thing, Your Honor. I want to show why the business is worth what it's worth. He pulled out a portfolio. These are designs I created. Every major commission, every featured piece, I designed it. I built it. I installed it. Here's documentation from clients confirming they hired Marcus Steele and designed specifically for my work. Here's testimony from 3 employees confirming I do all design and fabrication work, while Miss Davidson handled only basic scheduling. The business is worth $8 million because of my skill, my reputation, my art. He set down the portfolio. Miss Davidson tried to steal my life's work. She tried to take everything I built and leave me with nothing. I just want what's mine. Morrison nodded slowly. The court finds the following. Marcus Steele and Design was founded solely by Marcus Bryant with his own capital and resources. Miss Davidson's claims of financial investment are fabricated. The documents submitted by Miss Davidson are forgeries. Miss Davidson has committed perjury and attempted fraud. He looked directly at Melissa. Miss Davidson, you will receive nothing from this marriage. No portion of the business. No alimony, nothing. You're fortunate I'm not holding you in contempt, but I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal prosecution. You have attempted to steal $8 million through fraud. That's grand theft by any definition. Melissa was sobbing now. Gloria stood, shouting, "This is ridiculous. My daughter deserves. Your daughter deserves prison." Morrison snapped. "Sit down, Mrs. Davidson, or I'll hold you in contempt." Gloria sat, shaking with rage. Morrison continued. "Furthermore, the marital home was purchased with Mr. Bryant's business earnings. It belongs to him. Joint savings will be divided equally. That's $40,000 for each party. But that's all Miss Davidson will receive. Mr. Bryant, Marcus Steele and Design is yours, free and clear. This court orders Miss Davidson to surrender any and all business documents, keys, passwords, and access within 24 hours. He banged his gavel. Divorce granted. This hearing is concluded. Marcus let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. It was over. He'd won. Bernard grabbed his shoulder. Holy shit, Marcus. That was... I've never seen anything like that. Why didn't you show me all of this earlier? Because I needed you to be genuine, Marcus said quietly. If you'd known what I had, you might have acted differently. I needed them to think they were winning until the moment they lost. Bernard shook his head in amazement. You played them perfectly. Across the courtroom, Carlton was gathering his papers, avoiding Melissa's desperate attempts to speak with him. Gloria was on her phone, probably calling someone to rant about the injustice. Melissa just sat, destroyed. Marcus walked past them without a word. He'd said everything he needed to say, but as he reached the door, Melissa's voice stopped him. Marcus, wait, please. He turned. She looked small now, fragile, all her confidence stripped away. This wasn't supposed to happen like this, she said. I thought. Carlton said we'd win. He said you couldn't fight it. You thought I was stupid, Marcus said calmly. You thought I was just a dumb craftsman who wouldn't notice his wife plotting to destroy him. But that was your mistake, Melissa. I built an $8 million business from nothing. You think I'm not smart enough to see you coming? We were married, she whispered. Doesn't that mean anything? It did. To me. But you and your mother? You saw me as a mark, someone to use and discard. Well, congratulations. You got exactly what you deserved. He walked out of the courtroom into sunlight that felt brighter than it had in months. 3 days later, Marcus stood in his workshop, his legally confirmed, solely owned workshop. The business accounts had been secured, new locks installed, all of Melissa's access revoked. She'd turned over the keys and passwords without further fight. The threat of criminal prosecution had a remarkable way of ensuring cooperation. The district attorney had indeed opened an investigation. Bernard said Melissa and Gloria would likely face charges for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. Carlton Simmons had already filed a motion to withdraw as their attorney and was reportedly furious about being used in their scheme. Marcus's phone rang. A client. Mr. Bryant, I heard about your divorce. I just wanted to say, I'm glad it worked out. Your work is exceptional, and I've got another project I'd like to discuss. More calls came throughout the day. Clients checking in, offering support, wanting to hire him for new projects. Word had spread about the courtroom showdown. Instead of damaging his reputation, the whole affair had somehow enhanced it. Marcus Bryant, the artist who'd built an empire from nothing and defended it against his own wife. He was welding a new piece when Bernard stopped by that evening. The DA called, Bernard said. Melissa's trying to cut a deal. She'll plead guilty to lesser charges if they don't prosecute her mother. What do you think? Marcus asked. I think Gloria was the mastermind. But Melissa still forged those documents. She's an adult who made her choices. Bernard paused. What do you want? Marcus thought about it. The anger had faded, replaced by something calmer. Tell the DA I won't oppose whatever they decide. I got what I want in my business, my life back. The legal system can handle the rest. That's generous considering what she tried to do. It's not generous. It's closure. I'm done letting them live in my head rent-free. After Bernard left, Marcus returned to his work. The piece he was building was a custom gate for a private estate, intricate scrollwork incorporating the client's family history. It would take weeks to complete, require absolute precision, and pay enough to hire another assistant. This was what he loved. Not the money, though that was nice. Not the recognition, though he appreciated it. He loved the work itself. The challenge of taking raw metal and transforming it into art. The satisfaction of solving complex design problems. The tangible proof that his hands and mind could create something beautiful and lasting. Melissa never understood that. She saw the business as a means to an end: money, status, security. She never grasped that, for Marcus, the business was the art, and the art was everything. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You destroyed my daughter's life. I hope you're proud. Wait. Gloria. Still bitter, still blaming everyone but herself. Marcus deleted the text and blocked the number. Some people would never learn. Gloria had raised Melissa to be entitled, greedy, and contemptuous of people who actually worked for a living. Now, both were facing consequences for that worldview. He thought about sending a response, something cutting, but what was the point? He'd already won the only battle that mattered. A week later, Marcus was featured in a local business magazine. How I Built Marcus Steel and Design. One Artist's Journey, the headline read. The article detailed his start, his techniques, his philosophy. It mentioned the divorce only in passing. Bryant recently prevailed in a difficult legal battle that confirmed his sole ownership of the company. The article brought more clients, more recognition. Marcus hired 2 new assistants to help with the growing workload. He moved into a larger workshop. He started dating again, casually, nothing serious. He was rediscovering what it meant to live without someone undermining him. Life was good. Better than good. 6 months after the divorce, Marcus received a call from Bernard. You might want to sit down, Bernard said. Melissa and Gloria took a plea deal. Melissa got 2 years probation, community service, and restitution. She has to pay you $50,000 for legal fees and damages. Gloria got 1 year probation. Carlton Simmons is facing a bar investigation for not properly vetting his client's documents, though he'll probably survive it. 2 years probation? Marcus was surprised. That's it? First offense, no prior record. They showed remorse well. They claimed to. The DA figured a criminal record and public humiliation was punishment enough. Plus, you got your business, and they got nothing. The judge considered that when sentencing. Marcus thought about it. 2 years of probation wasn't much for attempted fraud of $8 million. But then, they'd already lost everything that mattered. Melissa's reputation was destroyed. Gloria's social standing, which she valued more than anything, was ruined. They'd be known forever as the mother-daughter duo who tried to steal a man's business and failed spectacularly. I can live with that, Marcus said finally. There's one more thing, Bernard added. Gloria's lawyer contacted me. Apparently, she's trying to sell her house to cover legal fees. She's broke. The divorce and criminal cases cleaned her out. The irony was rich. Gloria, who'd looked down on Marcus for working with his hands, was now penniless while he was thriving. Thanks for letting me know, Marcus said. And Bernard, thanks for everything. You did the heavy lifting, Marcus. I just stood there looking professional. After hanging up, Marcus walked through his expanded workshop. 3 employees worked on different projects: a staircase, a gate, a sculptural installation. All his designs, all his vision. He'd built this, not with family money or connections or fraud, with skill, determination, and 8 years of relentless work. Melissa had wanted to take it all and leave him with nothing. Instead, she'd lost everything while he gained something invaluable, the unshakable knowledge that he'd earned every bit of his success. No one had given it to him. No one could take it away. His phone rang again. A new client, a hospital commissioning a memorial sculpture for their lobby. High profile, prestigious, well-paying. Marcus smiled and answered the call. This was his life now. The one he'd built himself. The one he defended and won. And it felt damn good. 1 year after the divorce, Marcus received an unexpected visitor at his workshop. He was training a new apprentice when the door opened and a woman walked in. Not Melissa. He recognized her, though Johanna McCarthy, Melissa's cousin. They'd met a few times at family events. Marcus, she said, looking uncomfortable. Can we talk? He stepped outside with her. What's this about? I wanted to apologize, Johanna said. I knew what Melissa and Aunt Gloria were planning. Not all of it, but enough. I should have warned you. Marcus studied her. Why didn't you? Family loyalty, I guess. And honestly, I didn't think they'd go through with it. I thought it was just talk, just bitterness. She looked down. I was wrong. What they did to you was monstrous. Yeah, it was. Melissa's life is a disaster now. Johanna continued. She's working retail, living with Gloria in a tiny apartment. No one from the family talks to them anymore. They're pariahs. And Gloria, she's just angry all the time. Bitter. She blames you for everything. Of course she does. I just wanted you to know that not everyone in that family supported what they did. Some of us think you're amazing for building what you built, and I'm sorry for not speaking up. Marcus nodded. I appreciate you saying that. Johanna left, and Marcus returned to his work. The visit was strange but somehow satisfying. Even Melissa's own family had turned on her. He thought about Melissa working retail, living in poverty with her mother. Part of him, a small, vindictive part, felt satisfaction. But mostly, he just felt relief. Relief that he'd escaped. Relief that his life was his own again. That evening, Marcus had dinner with Naomi McIntosh, a structural engineer he'd been seeing for 3 months. She was smart, independent, and genuinely interested in his work. No games, no manipulation, just honesty. You seem happy, Naomi said over dessert. I am, Marcus realized. For the first time in years, I actually am. Think you'll ever get married again? Maybe. Someday. When I find someone who sees me as a partner, not a paycheck. Naomi smiled. Good answer. They walked through the city after dinner, talking about everything and nothing. Marcus thought about how different this felt from his time with Melissa. No tension, no hidden agendas. Just two people enjoying each other's company. His phone buzzed. He ignored it. Whatever it was could wait. Later, he checked. An email from a museum curator in Chicago. They wanted to commission a major installation for their modern art wing. The budget was substantial, the exposure invaluable. Marcus smiled and started mentally sketching designs. Life kept getting better. The business grew. His reputation spread beyond the region. He was invited to speak at design conferences, featured in national magazines. Awards started coming, recognition from his industry peers for excellence in metalwork and sculpture. Every success felt earned because it was earned. Every piece of recognition meant something because no one had manufactured it for him. He'd built this life with his own hands and mind, and no one could ever take that away. 2 years after the divorce, Marcus received one final communication from Melissa, a letter, handwritten, delivered to his workshop. Marcus, it read, I know you probably hate me. I deserve that. I've had 2 years to think about what I did, and I'm ashamed. Mother convinced me you were beneath me, that you didn't deserve what you'd built. I believed her because it was easier than admitting I was jealous of your talent and success. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I understand now. You built something beautiful, and I tried to destroy it because I couldn't stand that you did it without needing me. I thought I was essential, but I was just along for the ride. You're going to do amazing things, Marcus. I wish I could have been the partner you deserved instead of the anchor I became. I'm sorry. For everything. Melissa. Marcus read the letter twice, then filed it away. Not in the trash, he wasn't angry enough for that anymore. But not somewhere prominent either. It was closure, nothing more. He'd moved on, built a new life, found someone who appreciated him for who he was, not what he could provide. His business thrived, his art evolved, he was happy. That was the best revenge, not destruction, but success. Not tearing them down, but building himself up. Melissa and Gloria had tried to take everything, and in doing so, they'd given him something invaluable, the absolute certainty of his own worth. Marcus Bryant had started with $3,000 and a dream. He'd built an empire, lost it all in a courtroom, and won it back with preparation, intelligence, and unshakable proof of his own work. Some stories end with dramatic confrontations and public destructions. This one ended with a man standing in his workshop at midnight, welding a new piece, completely at peace with himself and his life. He'd faced his enemies and won. Not through violence or escalation, but through patience and proof. He'd let them think they were winning, let them commit fully to their fraud, then destroyed them with the truth. It was elegant, efficient, and most importantly, it worked. Marcus finished the weld, examined it critically, and nodded in satisfaction. Perfect. Like everything else he built, he cleaned up, locked the workshop, and drove home to the life he'd earned. Tomorrow would bring new projects, new challenges, new opportunities. But tonight, he'd savor this simple truth. He'd won. Completely, definitively, deservedly. And that was enough. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation Cracks. Trevor Daniels had built his life like a fortress. Methodical, calculated, and impenetrable. At 42, he owned 3 successful auto repair shops across the city, each one a testament to his relentless work ethic and razor-sharp business mind. His calloused hands told the story of a man who'd crawled from the trailer parks of Alabama to suburban prosperity through sheer determination and an almost frightening ability to hold grudges. The scar running from his left temple to his jaw served as a permanent reminder of his father's drunken rage. The night 17-year-old Trevor had finally fought back and won. He'd left home that same night, never looking back, never forgiving. That was Trevor's way. Cross him once, and you were dead to him forever. Candace had been different, or so he'd thought. When they'd met 15 years ago at a charity car show, she was a 25-year-old social worker with honey blonde hair and a laugh that could melt steel. She'd approached his vintage Mustang display with genuine curiosity, asking technical questions that impressed him. Most women pretended interest in his cars. Candace actually understood them. Their courtship had been a whirlwind. Within 6 months, she was pregnant with twins, Aiden and Brooke. Trevor had proposed immediately, not out of obligation, but because he genuinely believed he'd found his partner for life. The wedding had been modest, but perfect, held in his shop after hours with their closest friends celebrating among the smell of motor oil and chrome. Now, 16 years later, their suburban home in Millbrook felt like a museum of manufactured happiness. Family photos lined the hallways, camping trips to Lake Tahoe, Christmas mornings, graduations, and birthdays. Trevor had provided everything. The 4-bedroom house with a white picket fence, private school tuitions, family vacations to Europe. He'd worked 60-hour weeks to give them the life his own father never could. But something had shifted in recent months. Candace had become distant, her phone constantly buzzing with text messages she'd quickly hide. She'd started working late more often, citing difficult cases at the social services office. When Trevor would try to initiate intimacy, she'd claim exhaustion or stress. Their conversations had reduced to logistics. Who was picking up Aiden for basketball practice? What time Brooke's dance recital started? Trevor's instincts, honed by years of dealing with dishonest customers and unreliable suppliers, had begun sending warning signals. He'd learned to trust his gut completely. It had saved him from bad business deals and dangerous situations more times than he could count. But this time, he'd pushed the doubts aside. This was his wife, the mother of his children, his partner in building their American dream. That trust had been his mistake. The call came at exactly 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday night in October. Trevor had been sleeping deeply after a particularly exhausting day dealing with a problematic engine rebuild. The piercing ring of his cell phone jolted him awake, his hand instinctively reaching for the nightstand. Trevor Daniels? The voice was unfamiliar, professional, with a slight southern accent. Who is this? Do you know what time it is? My name is Richard Kowalski. I'm an attorney representing your wife in what I believe will soon become divorce proceedings. Trevor sat up in bed, his blood turning to ice. Beside him, Candace continued sleeping, her breathing steady and peaceful. What the hell are you talking about? Mr. Daniels, I'm calling because there's something you need to know before tomorrow's official filing. Your children, Aiden and Brooke, they're not biologically yours. The words hit Trevor like a physical blow. He stood up, walking to the window, his legs suddenly unsteady. You're lying. I wish I were, sir. DNA tests were conducted 3 weeks ago. The results are conclusive. Neither child shares your genetic material. Trevor's vision blurred momentarily. 16 years of bedtime stories, little league games, helping with homework, teaching Aiden how to change oil, watching Brooke's first dance recital. Every memory felt suddenly contaminated, poisoned by this revelation. Who? The word came out as a growl. Paul Morrison. Your wife's relationship with him began approximately 18 years ago and never ended. Paul Morrison. The name hit Trevor like another punch. Paul had been his best friend since childhood, the best man at his wedding, godfather to the twins. Paul, who came to every family barbecue, every birthday party, who'd helped Trevor move into this house. Paul, who'd comforted Candace when Trevor's grandfather died last year, who'd been there for every major moment of their marriage. You're lying, Trevor repeated, but his voice lacked conviction. I'm texting you the DNA results now, Mr. Daniels. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but Mrs. Daniels felt you deserved to know before the papers are served. The phone buzzed in Trevor's hand. He opened the message and saw the official letterhead, the clinical language, the percentages that prove his entire life had been built on lies. Probability of paternity, 0%. Trevor stood in his bedroom, looking at his sleeping wife, and felt something inside him break. Not his heart, that had been hardened by too many betrayals in his life. What broke was his faith in his own judgment, his belief that he could trust anyone completely. He thought about Paul's frequent visits, his insistence on spending time with the kids, his recent divorce from his own wife Lisa just 6 months ago. How many times had Trevor joked about Paul being like a second father to Aiden and Brooke? How many times had Candace volunteered to help Paul through his difficult time after the divorce? The laughter that escaped Trevor's throat was cold and bitter. He'd been the fool, the cuckold, the joke that everyone was in on except him. But as he stood there in the darkness, looking at the woman who'd stolen 16 years of his life, Trevor felt his old nature reasserting itself. The same ruthless streak that had built his business empire, that had severed ties with his abusive family forever, that had never forgiven a single betrayal in his entire life. Candace and Paul had made the mistake of thinking Trevor Daniels was soft, that he'd simply accept this humiliation and move on. They were about to learn what happened to people who betrayed Trevor Daniels. He grabbed his keys from the dresser, moving with the silent precision of a predator. There would be no confrontation tonight, no dramatic scene. Trevor had learned long ago that revenge was a dish best served with careful planning and perfect execution. As he walked to his truck, Trevor's phone buzzed again. Another text from the lawyer. Mrs. Daniels and Mr. Morrison are currently at 1247 Elm Street. I thought you should know. That was Eleanor Hartwell's address, Candace's mother. Trevor started his engine and began driving through the empty streets, his mind already calculating possibilities, planning moves like a chess grandmaster. By the time this was over, Candace and Paul would wish they'd never been born. The foundation of Trevor's life had cracked tonight. Now it was time to bring the whole house down on everyone who'd betrayed him. Chapter 2. The Discovery. The drive to Eleanor Hartwell's house took Trevor through the quiet streets of Millbrook's historic district, where Victorian homes sat like sleeping giants under ancient oak trees. His hands gripped the steering wheel with surgical precision, his breathing controlled despite the hurricane of rage building inside him. This was how Trevor operated. Ice-cold calculation wrapped around molten fury. Eleanor's house at 1247 Elm Street was a testament to old money and older secrets. The three-story Victorian had been the Hartwell family for 4 generations, its gingerbread trim and wraparound porch hiding decades of family drama behind lace curtains and polite society manners. Trevor had always felt like an outsider here, the working-class husband who'd never quite measured up to Eleanor's standards for her precious daughter. Now, as he parked across the street and studied the house, Trevor understood why Eleanor had always looked at him with barely concealed disdain. She'd known. She'd known from the beginning that her grandchildren weren't his, and she'd watched him pour his heart and wallet into raising another man's offspring while smiling to his face at every family gathering. The house was dark except for a single light in the upstairs master bedroom, Eleanor's room. But parked in the circular driveway were 2 cars Trevor recognized, Candace's silver BMW and Paul's black pickup truck. The sight of them together, brazenly displayed at her mother's house, sent a fresh wave of rage through Trevor's system. He sat in his truck for nearly an hour, watching and planning. This wasn't just about catching them in the act. Trevor needed intelligence, leverage, ammunition for what was coming next. He'd learned patience in the military before starting his business, learned that the best attacks came after careful reconnaissance. Finally, movement caught his eye. The front door opened, and Paul Morrison stepped onto the porch, stretching like a man who'd just woken up. Even from across the street, Trevor could see the casual comfort in Paul's movements, the easy familiarity with the house that spoke of frequent visits. Paul lit a cigarette and stood smoking in the cool night air, completely unaware he was being watched. Trevor studied his former best friend with new eyes. Paul had always been the smoother one, the charmer who could talk his way into anything. In high school, Paul had been a quarterback while Trevor worked in the auto shop. They'd bonded over their shared love of cars and their dreams of escaping their dead-end town. When Trevor had started his business, Paul had been there with encouragement and startup capital. When Paul's own construction company had failed 5 years ago, Trevor had offered him work and friendship without question. Looking at Paul now, Trevor wondered how long this betrayal had been planned. Had Paul always coveted Candace? Had their entire friendship been a lie designed to keep Trevor close while Paul stole his life piece by piece? The front door opened again, and Candace emerged wearing a silk robe Trevor didn't recognize. She moved to Paul's side with an intimacy that made Trevor's jaw clench. They spoke in whispers, their body language screaming decades of hidden romance. When Paul pulled her close and kissed her neck, Candace laughed, the same musical laugh that had captivated Trevor 16 years ago. But it was what happened next that made Trevor's blood run cold. The porch light flickered on, and Eleanor Hartwell stepped outside. Instead of the outrage or shock one might expect from discovering her daughter with another man, Eleanor smiled warmly and handed Paul a cup of coffee. The 3 of them stood together like a family, comfortable and natural in their deception. Eleanor reached up and touched Paul's face with the affection of a mother-in-law who'd always preferred him to Trevor. The gesture was small but devastating. It proved this wasn't a recent affair, but a long-term relationship that had Eleanor's full blessing and support. Trevor's phone buzzed with a text from Candace. "Working late tonight. Don't wait up. Love you." The casual cruelty of the lie, sent while she stood in her lover's arms, crystallized something inside Trevor. This wasn't just adultery. It was a coordinated campaign to humiliate and deceive him while stealing his money, his children, and his future. He took photos with his phone, documenting the scene with the same methodical precision he brought to everything else. But evidence for a divorce wasn't enough. Trevor wanted more than legal victory. He wanted complete and total destruction of everyone who'd betrayed him. As he prepared to leave, Trevor noticed something else that sent chills down his spine. Through the upstairs window, he could see two figures moving around, Aiden and Brooke. His children, no, Paul's children, were there too, part of this family gathering he'd never been invited to join. The realization hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't just about Candace and Paul's affair. The entire family structure he'd thought he was part of was an illusion. Eleanor's house was their real home, their real family gathering place. Trevor had been the outsider funding their real life while living in a carefully constructed lie. He thought about all the times Candace had taken the kids to visit Grandma Eleanor, all the family traditions he'd been excluded from with polite excuses about work schedules and prior commitments. Every holiday gathering, every family photo, every tender moment he'd been pushed to the sidelines while Paul played the real father figure. Trevor started his truck and drove home through streets that now felt foreign and hostile. His own house, when he pulled into the driveway, looked like a museum display, beautiful and empty, a stage set for a play he'd never been meant to star in. Inside, he poured himself 3 fingers of bourbon and sat at his kitchen table, staring at the photos on his phone. The loving family scene at Eleanor's house mocked every assumption he'd built his life around. But as the alcohol burned through his system, Trevor felt his old instincts taking over. He'd survived his father's brutality by being smarter and more ruthless than his enemies. He'd built his business empire by outworking and outthinking his competition. Every challenge in his life had been overcome through careful planning and relentless execution. Candace, Paul, and Eleanor thought they destroyed him tonight. They had no idea what they'd actually done was awaken something they should have left sleeping. Trevor Daniels had never lost a war he'd chosen to fight, and this war was going to be unlike anything they could imagine. By dawn, Trevor had filled 3 notebooks with plans, timelines, and contingencies. He'd identified every weakness in their defenses, every asset they thought was safe, every relationship they valued. The lawyer who'd called him had inadvertently provided the opening move in what would become the most comprehensive campaign of destruction Trevor had ever orchestrated. Candace and Paul thought they'd won by revealing their secret. They were about to learn that some victories come with a price too terrible to imagine. Chapter 3. The War Begins. Trevor didn't go to work the next morning. Instead, he sat in his kitchen drinking coffee and watching Candace perform her morning routine with the clinical detachment of a predator studying prey. She moved through their house with the practiced ease of someone living a perfectly scripted lie, making breakfast, chatting about the weather, kissing his cheek goodbye with lips that had been on another man just hours before. "Late meeting tonight," she said, adjusting her earrings in the hallway mirror. "Might not be home until after 10. Another lie delivered with Academy Award conviction. Trevor nodded and smiled, playing his part in their grotesque theater. "I'll leave dinner in the fridge." After Candace left, Trevor called his 3 shop managers and told them he was taking a personal week. Then he drove to a part of town he rarely visited, the kind of neighborhood where people minded their own business and asked few questions. Frank Castellano's private investigation agency operated out of a strip mall between a pawn shop and a tattoo parlor. Frank was a 60-year-old ex-cop who'd lost his badge for excessive force, but gained a reputation for results that stayed off official records. Trevor had met him 5 years ago when a business partner had tried to steal from him, and Frank had provided evidence that destroyed the man's life completely. "Trevor fucking Daniels," Frank grinned, standing up from behind his cluttered desk. "I wondered when you'd darken my door again. Someone steal from you." "Something like that," Trevor said, settling into the cracked leather chair across from Frank's desk. "I need a complete background investigation. Financial records, travel patterns, communication logs, employment history, medical records, family connections, everything." Frank pulled out a yellow legal pad. "Who are we looking at?" "My wife, Candace Daniels. Her lover, Paul Morrison. And her mother, Eleanor Hartwell." Frank's pen stopped moving. In 30 years of private investigation, he learned to read people's motivations with surgical precision. The man sitting across from him wasn't looking for closure or evidence for a divorce settlement. Trevor Daniels was planning a war. "This is going to cost you, and I mean serious money. The kind of deep dive you're talking about, the kind that gets into sealed records and protected databases. That's not cheap. Money isn't a concern, Trevor said, sliding a bank cashier's check across the desk. I want to know everything. Every secret, every weakness, every mistake they've ever made or try to hide. And I want it done quietly. Frank looked at the check, $50,000. More than enough to buy silence and thoroughness in equal measure. What's the timeline? 2 weeks. After that, I start phase 2. And what's phase 2? Trevor stood up, straightening his jacket. You don't want to know, Frank. You really don't want to know. From Frank's office, Trevor drove to his lawyer's office downtown. Mitchell Gray had been handling Trevor's business affairs for 8 years, guiding him through acquisitions, contracts, and the occasional lawsuit. Mitchell was expensive, connected, and completely without moral scruples when it came to protecting his client's interests. Trevor, Mitchell said, gesturing to the chair across from his mahogany desk. I heard about the situation. I'm sorry. No, you're not, Trevor said calmly. You're calculating billable hours and wondering how much this divorce is going to cost me. So let me save you some time. I'm not getting divorced. Mitchell's eyebrows rose. I'm not sure I understand. Candace thinks she's going to divorce me and take half my assets while moving in with her lover. She's miscalculated badly. Trevor leaned forward. I want you to quietly liquidate some of my holdings and move the money offshore. Nothing illegal, nothing that raises flags, but I want my core assets protected before she makes her move. Trevor, I have to advise you that hiding assets during divorce proceedings. She hasn't filed anything yet. Until she does, I'm simply reorganizing my portfolio. Trevor's smile was cold as Arctic wind. I also want you to research the legal ramifications of paternity fraud. 16 years of child support payments obtained through deception. I want to know if I can sue for every penny back. Mitchell made notes, his legal mind already working through possibilities. What else? I want to buy some property. Industrial land outside the city limits. Somewhere remote, somewhere private. Money's no object, but it needs to be done through shell companies. Multiple layers of ownership that can't be traced back to me. May I ask what for? Trevor stood up. Client privilege, Mitchell. Some things are better left unasked and unanswered. That afternoon, Trevor visited his eldest shop manager, Carlos Rodriguez. Carlos had been with Trevor for 12 years, starting as a mechanic and working his way up to manager through loyalty and competence. More importantly, Carlos had grown up in the same neighborhoods as Trevor, understood the same harsh rules about betrayal and respect. Boss, Carlos said, looking up from the engine he was rebuilding. Thought you were taking time off. I am. That's why I'm here. Trevor motioned Carlos into the office behind the shop floor. I need a favor, Carlos. A big one. Name it. I need you to find me some people. The kind of people who know how to make problems disappear quietly. The kind who don't ask questions and don't leave witnesses. Carlos's expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened slightly. In his youth, before Trevor had hired him, Carlos had run with some dangerous crowds. He'd left that life behind, but the connections remained. This about your wife? Among other things. Carlos nodded slowly. These kinds of people, they don't come cheap. And once you go down this road, I've been down darker roads than this, Trevor interrupted. The question is whether you're with me or against me. You saved my life when you hired me, gave me a chance when nobody else would. I'm with you until the end, boss. Whatever you need. Good. I need introductions, not services. Not yet, but when the time comes, I want options. That evening, Trevor sat in his study going through family photo albums while Candace was at her late meeting. Every picture felt like evidence in a criminal case. Birthday parties where Paul stood too close to the children. Family vacations where Paul had been mysteriously available to join them. Christmas mornings where Paul's gifts to Aiden and Brooke had been more thoughtful than Trevor's own. His phone rang at exactly 10:30. Candace, calling from the office. Hi, honey. Meeting ran super late. I'm going to stay at Mom's tonight instead of driving home exhausted. Another lie, delivered with the same casual ease. Trevor could hear Paul's voice in the background, probably didn't realize he was audible. Of course, Trevor said. Drive safe. Love you. Love you too. After hanging up, Trevor poured himself a drink, and called Frank Castellano. "It's only been one day," Frank said without preamble. "I need you to accelerate the timeline. Money's no object. Hire whoever you need to hire, bribe whoever you need to bribe, but I want preliminary results in 72 hours. "What changed? "They're moving faster than I anticipated, which means I need to move faster too." Trevor hung up and opened his laptop. Over the next 6 hours, he created a detailed spreadsheet tracking every asset, every relationship, every vulnerability in his enemies' lives. By dawn, he had identified 17 different pressure points he could exploit, 12 relationships he could destroy, and 8 financial levers he could pull to bring their world crashing down. Candace thought she was playing chess while Trevor was playing checkers. She was about to learn that Trevor Daniels didn't just play chess. He invented new rules while the game was in progress, rules that would leave his opponents utterly destroyed. The war had begun, and Trevor intended to be the only survivor. Chapter 4: Gathering Intelligence. Frank Castellano's preliminary report arrived 72 hours later in the form of a thick manila envelope delivered by a courier who'd asked no questions and left no traces. Trevor read it in his locked office at the main auto shop, each page revealing layers of deception that went deeper than he'd imagined. Candace's affair with Paul Morrison hadn't begun 18 years ago. It had begun 20 years ago, before she'd ever met Trevor. Their relationship had been serious enough that Paul had proposed, but Candace had broken it off when she discovered Paul's gambling problem and mounting debts. She'd met Trevor 6 months later at the charity car show, pregnant with Paul's children and looking for a stable provider. The DNA results confirmed what Trevor already knew, but Frank's investigation revealed something worse. Candace and Paul had never really ended their relationship. They'd maintained contact throughout her marriage to Trevor, their affair resuming whenever Paul's life stabilized. The most recent reconciliation had begun 2 years ago when Paul had finally gotten clean from gambling and started his new job in construction management. Eleanor Hartwell hadn't just known about the affair. She'd been its facilitator and financier. Bank records showed regular transfers from Eleanor's trust fund to both Candace and Paul, including a down payment on Paul's new apartment 6 months ago. Eleanor had been funding their separate household, while Trevor unknowingly subsidized their family life. But the most damning discovery was a series of emails between Candace and a divorce attorney dated 3 months earlier. She'd been planning Trevor's destruction for months, calculating asset division, researching alimony claims, and strategizing how to maximize her settlement while minimizing Trevor's custody rights. The emails revealed a cold, calculating woman who viewed Trevor as nothing more than a financial resource to be exploited and discarded. Paul Morrison's background revealed a different kind of betrayal. His construction job was legitimate, but Frank had uncovered something interesting. Paul was working on a major commercial development project, one that would require significant auto repair services for the construction fleet. Services that Paul had steered away from Trevor shops and toward a competitor owned by Candace's cousin. Trevor had been systematically excluded from business opportunities within his own extended family network, his financial contributions taken while his professional expertise was deliberately undermined. The psychological profiles Frank had compiled painted a picture of calculated manipulation spanning nearly 2 decades. Candace wasn't just an unfaithful wife. She was a sophisticated con artist who'd identified Trevor as the perfect mark and executed a long-term strategy to extract maximum value while maintaining her primary relationship with Paul. Trevor finished reading the report as the sun set outside his office window. He'd known his wife was cheating, but discovering the scope and duration of her deception was like learning his entire adult life had been an elaborate theatrical performance designed to rob him blind. He called Carlos into his office and shared the relevant portions of Frank's report. "Jesus, boss," Carlos said, shaking his head. "This is worse than I thought. What's the play?" Phase 1 is gathering more intelligence. I want to know their daily routines, their meeting places, their communication patterns. Everything. Trevor opened his desk drawer and pulled out a small digital device. Frank provided some interesting toys: tracking devices, audio surveillance, digital monitoring equipment. All legally gray, but not technically illegal if deployed correctly. You want me to plant these? I want you to coordinate with Frank's people. Professional surveillance, professional equipment, professional results. We're going to map their entire operation before we strike. Carlos nodded. In Phase 2, Trevor's smile was arctic. Phase 2 is where things get creative. That weekend, while Candace took the children to visit Eleanor, officially, and Paul, unofficially, Trevor visited the industrial property Mitchell Gray had purchased through shell companies. 200 acres of abandoned warehouse space 40 minutes outside the city, surrounded by chain-link fence and completely isolated from neighbors or casual observers. The main warehouse was a relic from the 1970s, its concrete floors and high ceilings perfect for Trevor's purposes. He spent the day taking measurements, planning renovations, and envisioning how the space would serve his ultimate goals. On Monday morning, Trevor visited his bank and liquidated another $1 million in assets, transferring the money to offshore accounts Mitchell had established. Then he drove to a meeting with someone Carlos had introduced him to, a man who called himself Vincent and asked no questions about names or motivations. Vincent operated out of a legitimate security consulting firm, but his real expertise lay in acquiring items and services that existed in legal gray areas. For the right price, Vincent could provide equipment, expertise, and personnel for situations that required absolute discretion. Your friend Carlos says you need some specialized assistance, Vincent said, his office decorated with military memorabilia and framed photos of security deployments in various global hotspots. I need to renovate a warehouse space for some private business activities. The work needs to be done quietly, by people who don't keep records or ask questions. What kind of renovations? Trevor handed Vincent a detailed set of architectural drawings he prepared over the weekend. Soundproof rooms, reinforced construction, specialized lighting and ventilation, underground storage areas, security systems that couldn't be monitored by outside agencies. Vincent studied the plans with professional interest. This is specialized construction, the kind that requires specialized workers and specialized silence. Money's no object. Timeline is 4 weeks. This is going to cost serious money. 7 figures. Trevor handed him a cashier's check. That's a down payment. You'll get the rest when construction is complete and tested to my specifications. Vincent looked at the check, $500,000, and nodded slowly. I'll have crews here tomorrow. They'll work nights, use cash, and forget this place exists when they're done. That evening, Trevor sat in his study reviewing Frank's expanded surveillance reports. The intelligence picture was becoming clearer. Candace and Paul maintained a regular schedule of meetings, communications, and financial transactions that revealed a parallel life completely separate from anything Trevor had known about. They met Tuesday and Thursday evenings at Eleanor's house, usually arriving separately and staying overnight. Weekend visits always included the children, creating family gatherings Trevor was never invited to attend. Paul had keys to Eleanor's house and his own room there, complete with personal belongings and family photos that included himself but excluded Trevor. The financial records showed a sophisticated money laundering operation designed to hide assets and income from Trevor's potential discovery. Eleanor's trust fund disbursements were structured to avoid triggering reporting requirements, while Candace's spending patterns indicated she was maintaining 2 separate households with Trevor's money. Most significantly, Frank had discovered that Candace and Paul had already signed a lease on a house across town, a 4-bedroom family home they planned to move into immediately after serving Trevor with divorce papers. The lease was scheduled to begin in 6 weeks, suggesting their timeline for destroying Trevor's life was accelerating. Trevor closed the surveillance files and opened his laptop. Over the next 3 hours, he updated his master plan with new intelligence, adjusting timelines and targeting strategies based on his enemy's revealed patterns and weaknesses. Phase 2 would begin in 2 weeks, once the warehouse renovations were complete and all surveillance assets were in place. But before the main event, Trevor had some preliminary moves to make. Strategic strikes designed to destabilize his targets and create the psychological conditions necessary for their complete destruction. Candace, Paul, and Eleanor thought they were playing a long game, systematically dismantling Trevor's life while building their own. They had no idea that Trevor was playing a deeper game entirely, one where their victory would become the foundation of their absolute annihilation. The hunter had become the hunted, but they didn't know it yet. Chapter 5. The Setup. 2 weeks later, Trevor's warehouse had been transformed into something that would have impressed military special operations planners. Vincent's crews had worked with clockwork precision, installing soundproof walls, reinforced steel doors, industrial-grade ventilation systems, and underground storage areas accessible only through hidden panels. The facility now contained everything Trevor would need for the final phase of his plan, including some capabilities he hoped he wouldn't have to use. Frank's surveillance operation had provided a complete intelligence picture of his target's movements, communications, and vulnerabilities. Trevor now knew that Candace and Paul planned to serve him with divorce papers in exactly 10 days, timing their attack to coincide with the end of the school year when they could immediately relocate the children to their new house. But Trevor had decided not to wait for their move. It was time to begin destabilizing their carefully constructed plans. The first strike came on a Tuesday morning when Paul Morrison arrived at his construction site to discover that his crew's equipment had been vandalized overnight. Every piece of machinery had been sabotaged in ways that wouldn't be immediately apparent but would cause catastrophic failures within hours of operation. Nothing traceable to Trevor, but professional enough to suggest someone with serious mechanical expertise had orchestrated the attack. The equipment failures cascaded throughout the week, causing massive delays on Paul's project and triggering penalty clauses in his construction contract. By Friday, Paul's company was facing a $100,000 loss and potential bankruptcy, a problem that would disappear if someone with automotive expertise helped repair the sabotage machinery. Trevor's second move was more subtle but equally devastating. Through shell companies and intermediaries, he began acquiring dead instruments and business relationships throughout Candace and Paul's extended network. A mortgage held by Eleanor's bank, credit lines used by Paul's struggling business, service contracts with the private school Aiden and Brooke attended. Within a week, Trevor controlled significant financial leverage over every aspect of his enemies' lives, though they remained completely unaware of his invisible influence over their economic foundations. The third move was psychological warfare. Trevor began leaving subtle evidence that he knew more than he was admitting. A Paul Morrison business card left on the kitchen counter, casual mentions of Eleanor's recent family gatherings during dinner conversation, innocent questions about Candace's late work meetings that included details only surveillance could have provided. The effect was to create paranoia and suspicion among his targets without giving them any concrete evidence of Trevor's knowledge or intentions. Candace became increasingly nervous. Paul started looking over his shoulder, and Eleanor began insisting on more security measures for their clandestine meetings. But Trevor's masterpiece was the fourth move, one that required patience, timing, and absolute precision. Through Vincent's contacts, Trevor had arranged for Paul Morrison to be offered a lucrative construction contract in another state. The offer came from a legitimate company with an excellent reputation, but the contract was structured to require Paul's immediate relocation to oversee a year-long project. The financial terms were too good to refuse, but accepting would mean leaving behind his relationship with Candace and the children just as their divorce plans were reaching fruition. Trevor had created a classic dilemma. Paul could choose financial security or personal relationship, but not both. Either choice would destabilize the conspiracy against Trevor and provide openings for further manipulation. The surveillance reports showed the stress fractures beginning to appear. Candace and Paul's meetings had become tense, their conversations increasingly focused on disagreements about timing and strategy. Eleanor had begun questioning whether their divorce plans were moving too quickly, suggesting they needed more time to prepare for Trevor's potential responses. Trevor's systematic pressure campaign was working exactly as designed, creating doubt, fear, and conflict among his enemies while positioning himself as an invisible puppet master, controlling their choices and reactions. On Friday evening, Trevor received a text from Candace canceling their weekend plans due to a family emergency, at Eleanor's house. Instead of the anger or suspicion such a message might have provoked a month earlier, Trevor felt only satisfaction. The surveillance equipment he'd had installed at Eleanor's house would record whatever crisis meeting they were holding, providing him with real-time intelligence about their changing plans and psychological states. That night, Trevor sat in his study listening to audio feeds from Eleanor's house through high-end headphones. The conversation was everything he'd hoped for and more. "Something's wrong," Candace was saying, her voice tight with stress. "Trevor's been different lately. He knows things he shouldn't know." "You're being paranoid," Paul replied, but his tone suggested he was equally concerned. "We've been careful." "Careful." Eleanor's voice was sharp with anxiety. "Paul's business is falling apart. Trevor's asking strange questions. And now this job offer that's too convenient to be coincidental. Someone's playing games with us." Trevor smiled in the darkness. They were beginning to understand they were under attack, but they had no idea who was attacking them or how comprehensive his intelligence and preparation had become. Their paranoia was justified, but their responses were predictable and vulnerable to further manipulation. "We need to accelerate the timeline," Candace continued. "Serve the papers next week instead of waiting." "That's exactly what we can't do," Eleanor argued. "If Trevor suspects something, rushing the divorce will confirm his suspicions and put us at a disadvantage." Trevor listened to them debate strategy and timeline, each argument revealing more about their planning process and psychological vulnerabilities. They were scared, confused, and beginning to turn on each other. Exactly the mental state Trevor needed them in for phase 2 of his plan. He opened his laptop and began updating his operational timeline. The warehouse was ready. The surveillance network was providing perfect intelligence. His financial and legal preparations were complete, and his enemies were destabilizing themselves through fear and uncertainty. It was time to move from setup to execution. In 72 hours, Trevor would initiate the final phase of his plan. A sequence of events that would transform Candace, Paul, and Eleanor from confident conspirators into broken victims begging for mercy they would never receive. Trevor Daniels had spent a month preparing for war. Now it was time to win it. Chapter 6: The Trap. Sunday evening arrived with unseasonable warmth for October, the kind of weather that made people leave windows open and take unexpected walks. Trevor had spent the day at his warehouse, conducting final equipment tests and reviewing his operational plans with the methodical precision of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. At 7 p.m., he activated the first phase of his endgame. Paul Morrison's phone rang while he was having dinner with Candace and the children at Eleanor's house. The caller identified himself as the site's supervisor for the out-of-state construction project, reporting a catastrophic equipment failure that required Paul's immediate consultation. Without his expertise, the caller explained, the project would shut down for weeks, costing millions and destroying Paul's company's reputation forever. Trevor listened to the call through surveillance equipment, watching Paul's face via hidden cameras as the pressure mounted. The emergency was completely fabricated. Vincent's people were exceptionally skilled at creating convincing crises, but Paul had no way of knowing that. "I have to go," Paul told Candace, his face pale with stress. "This could bankrupt the company." "You can't leave now," Candace protested. "We're supposed to meet with the lawyer tomorrow about the divorce papers." "This is more important than your divorce," Paul snapped, the pressure finally causing cracks in their relationship. "If I lose this contract, we won't have any money to fight Trevor anyway." Trevor smiled, watching their argument escalate through his cameras. Nothing destroyed conspiracies faster than financial pressure and conflicting priorities. Paul left Eleanor's house at 8:30 p.m., driving toward the interstate and the fabricated emergency that would keep him occupied for the next several hours. Phase 1 was complete. Paul had been isolated from his support network and was being drawn into Trevor's preferred operational area. At 9 p.m., Trevor activated Phase 2. Candace's phone received an encrypted message that appeared to come from her divorce attorney. Emergency meeting required. Evidence suggests Trevor knows about affair. Meet at alternate location to discuss strategy. Come alone. The message included an address in the warehouse district. not Trevor's facility, but a legitimate office building where Vincent's people had established a temporary legal consultation service complete with authentic documentation and professional appearances. Trevor watched Candace's reaction through hidden cameras as she read the message. Her face went white, her hands shaking as she showed the text to her mother. "I have to go," Candace told Eleanor. "If Trevor's found out about us, I need to know how bad this is." "It's too dangerous," Eleanor protested. "What if this is a trap? A trap set by who? Trevor doesn't know about the lawyer, and nobody else knows about our plans." Trevor nearly laughed out loud. His enemy's inability to imagine the scope of his intelligence operations was making his job considerably easier. Candace left Eleanor's house at 9:45 p.m., driving toward what she believed was a meeting with her attorney, but was actually the first stage of her abduction. Vincent's people would intercept her en route, using professional techniques to convince her she was being taken into protective custody due to threats against her safety. At 10:30 p.m., Trevor activated Phase 3. Eleanor's doorbell rang, and through her security cameras, she saw two men in expensive suits holding official-looking identification. They claimed to be federal investigators working on a financial crimes task force, following up on suspicious banking activities connected to Eleanor's trust fund disbursements. The men were actually Vincent's operatives, but their credentials were perfect forgeries backed by authentic-looking paperwork and badge numbers that would check out if Eleanor tried to verify them. Their story was that someone had been using Eleanor's financial information to launder money through shell companies, and they needed her cooperation to prevent her from being charged as an accessory. Eleanor, already paranoid from the evening's events, invited them inside for what she believed would be a routine interview. Instead, she found herself agreeing to accompany them to a secure location where she could provide testimony away from potential surveillance by the criminal organization allegedly using her accounts. By midnight, all three targets were in Trevor's custody, though none of them understood the true nature of their situation yet. They believed they were dealing with separate emergencies: business crisis, legal emergency, federal investigation, having no idea these events were connected or orchestrated by Trevor. The warehouse facility where they were ultimately transported had been designed to look like a legitimate government safe house. Multiple rooms, professional security equipment, official-looking documentation, and personnel who maintained their cover identities with Academy Award-level conviction. Trevor didn't reveal himself immediately. Instead, he let them spend several hours in separate rooms, each believing they were in protective custody or emergency consultation, their stress and confusion building as their individual crises seemed to escalate beyond their control. At 3 a.m., Trevor finally made his entrance. He walked into the central conference room where Vincent's people had assembled all three targets, his appearance ending their confusion and replacing it with absolute terror. Candace began hyperventilating. Paul's face went ashen, and Eleanor simply stared in shock at the man they'd spent months planning to destroy. "Good morning," Trevor said, settling into a chair across from them with the casual ease of someone completely in control. "I believe we have some things to discuss." The soundproof room absorbed Candace's scream, and Trevor's smile never wavered. After a month of careful planning and patient execution, the real conversation could finally begin. His enemies were exactly where he wanted them, isolated, terrified, and completely at his mercy. Now, they would learn what happened to people who betrayed Trevor Daniels. Chapter 7: The Reckoning. The conference room in Trevor's warehouse facility was designed to break people psychologically before any physical persuasion became necessary. Harsh fluorescent lighting, uncomfortable steel chairs, walls lined with surveillance monitors showing empty corridors and locked doors. Most importantly, complete sound isolation that made screaming pointless while allowing normal conversation to carry the weight of absolute privacy. Trevor had changed into military-style clothing: black tactical pants, combat boots, and a plain black t-shirt that showed the muscular build he'd maintained through decades of physical labor. This wasn't the suburban businessman his prisoners had thought they knew. This was the predator they'd awakened. 20 years, Trevor said, his voice calm and conversational. 20 years of lies, theft, and betrayal. 20 years of watching me love children who weren't mine, while you laughed at my stupidity behind my back. Candace was sobbing, her carefully maintained facade of suburban respectability completely shattered. Paul sat rigid with terror, finally understanding the magnitude of his miscalculation. Eleanor maintained her aristocratic composure, but her hands shook as she gripped her chair. "Trevor, please," Candace began, but Trevor held up a hand for silence. "I'm going to explain how this works," he continued. "You're going to listen, you're going to confess everything, and then you're going to pay for what you've done. The alternative is considerably less pleasant." He pressed a button on a remote control, and the wall-mounted monitors came alive. The screens showed surveillance footage from months of watching them. Intimate moments between Candace and Paul, financial meetings with Eleanor, conversations about divorcing Trevor and stealing his assets, even footage of family gatherings where they'd celebrated holidays together while excluding him. "I know everything," Trevor said. "Every lie, every theft, every moment you thought you were safe. I know about the offshore accounts, the shell companies, the business deals you steered away from my companies. I know about the house you're planning to move in next week, and I know about the custody strategy designed to keep me away from children I spent 16 years loving." Paul finally found his voice. "Trevor, man, we can work this out. It doesn't have to be like this." Trevor's laugh was ice cold. "Work it out. You stole my wife, my children, my money, and 16 years of my life. You were my best friend, and you betrayed me every single day for 2 decades. There's no working this out, Paul. There's only paying the price." Eleanor tried to maintain her authority. "This is kidnapping, Trevor. You can't." "I can do whatever I want," Trevor interrupted. "You're 40 miles from civilization in a facility nobody knows exists, held by people who don't exist on any official records. I could keep you here forever, and nobody would ever find you." He stood up and walked to a cabinet, retrieving a leather portfolio filled with documents. "But I'm not a monster. I'm a businessman, so I'm going to offer you a choice." Trevor placed the documents on the table. "Option 1. You confess everything on video, transfer all stolen assets back to me, sign custody documents giving me full rights to Aiden and Brooke, and agree to disappear from their lives permanently. In exchange, I let you live." "And option 2? Eleanor asked, though her voice suggested she didn't want to know. "Option 2 is why I built the soundproof underground storage areas," Trevor said simply. The threat hung in the air like a physical presence. These people had underestimated Trevor Daniels completely, thinking he was a soft suburban businessman who would accept their betrayal and move on with his life. They were discovering that the man they tried to destroy was far more dangerous than they'd ever imagined. "The confessions will be detailed," Trevor continued. "I want dates, amounts, methods, co-conspirators. I want the complete story of how you planned to destroy my life, starting from the day you decided to use me as your financial provider while maintaining your real relationship." He activated a professional video camera mounted on a tripod. "Candace, you're first. Start with when you discovered you were pregnant with Paul's children and decided to find a reliable husband to support them." "I can't," Candace whispered. Trevor's expression didn't change, but he pressed another button on his remote control. Through the conference room speakers came audio of Aiden and Brooke laughing, children's voices that had been the center of Trevor's world for 16 years. "Those children are going to grow up either knowing their mother cooperated with justice," Trevor said, "or wondering why she disappeared without explanation. Your choice." The psychological pressure was devastating. Trevor wasn't just threatening their lives. He was threatening their relationships with the children they'd stolen from him. The same children whose love had been Trevor's greatest joy and deepest wound. One by one, they broke. Candace confessed first, her video testimony revealing the calculated nature of their deception with devastating clarity. She'd identified Trevor as a suitable provider after Paul's gambling addiction had made him an unreliable partner. Their marriage had been a business arrangement designed to extract maximum financial support while maintaining her real relationship with Paul. Paul's confession was even more damaging, revealing the systematic way he'd undermined Trevor's business interests while pretending friendship. He'd steered contracts away from Trevor's shops, shared confidential business information with competitors, and actively sabotaged Trevor's professional relationships within their extended network. Eleanor's testimony revealed the scope of the financial conspiracy, including detailed records of money transfers, asset hiding strategies, and the coordination required to maintain their parallel family structure for 2 decades. By dawn, Trevor had comprehensive video confessions, signed legal documents transferring all contested assets to his name, and custody agreements that would make him the children's sole guardian. More importantly, he had complete psychological dominance over 3 people who would never again threaten his interests or relationships. But Trevor wasn't finished. The confessions and legal documents were just the foundation for the real punishment he'd planned. Now comes the interesting part, Trevor said, his smile holding no warmth whatsoever. You're going to disappear. The final phase of Trevor's plan would ensure that Candace, Paul, and Eleanor could never threaten him again, while sending a message to anyone else who might consider betraying Trevor Daniels in the future. The reckoning was complete, but the punishment was just beginning. Chapter 8. The Punishment. Trevor's punishment phase began with the systematic destruction of his enemies' identities and social connections. Using the confessions they'd provided, along with evidence Frank Castellano had gathered over weeks of surveillance, Trevor orchestrated a campaign of public humiliation that would leave them friendless, unemployed, and completely isolated. The first step was financial annihilation. Using the legal documents his prisoners had signed, Trevor gained access to their bank accounts, investment portfolios, and credit lines. Within 48 hours, every asset they possessed had been either transferred to his name or liquidated to pay fabricated debts to shell companies he controlled. Paul Morrison's construction business collapsed overnight when Trevor called in the loans he'd secretly acquired. Candace's credit was destroyed through coordinated attacks on her financial history. Eleanor's trust fund was frozen pending investigation of the money laundering activities she confessed to on video. But financial destruction was just the appetizer. Trevor's main course was social obliteration. He released carefully edited portions of their video confessions to select members of their social and professional networks. Candace's colleagues at the Social Services Office learned about her systematic deception and theft. Paul's construction industry contacts received evidence of his fraudulent business practices. Eleanor's country club friends discovered her role in facilitating 2 decades of adultery and financial crime. The effect was devastating. Candace was fired from her job and blacklisted from social services work throughout the state. Paul's construction license was revoked pending investigation. Eleanor was expelled from her country club and shunned by the social circles that had defined her identity for 60 years. Trevor didn't stop with their immediate networks. He systematically contacted their extended families, former colleagues, and casual acquaintances, providing evidence that destroyed every relationship they'd built over their lifetimes. Within a week, all 3 were completely isolated, their reputations so thoroughly destroyed that rebuilding would be impossible. But social and financial destruction weren't enough for Trevor. He wanted them to experience the same helplessness and fear he'd felt when learning about their betrayal. The psychological warfare continued with a campaign of surveillance and intimidation that made them understand they were being watched constantly. Trevor's people would appear wherever they went: the grocery store, gas stations, medical appointments. Never threatening, never speaking, just there. Constant reminders that Trevor's reach was unlimited and his attention was permanent. Their phones received calls at random hours, sometimes silence, sometimes audio of their own conversations played back to them, sometimes just breathing before the line went dead. Mail was delivered to addresses where they no longer lived. Their few remaining acquaintances received anonymous packages containing evidence of additional crimes and betrayals. The message was clear. Trevor owned their lives completely, and there was nowhere they could hide from his influence. 3 weeks after their confessions, Trevor made his final move. Candace received a package containing divorce papers, custody documents awarding Trevor full parental rights, and a one-way bus ticket to a small town in Montana where Vincent's people had arranged for her to work as a night shift janitor at a meat processing plant. The job was legitimate, but was also completely isolated from any social connections or professional opportunities. Paul's package contained bankruptcy documents, criminal complaint forms that would be filed if he remained in the state, and a one-way ticket to Alaska where he could work in oil field construction. Dangerous, isolated work that matched his new status as a social outcast. Eleanor's package was the most devastating. Documentation proving her son-in-law now controlled her former home, her bank accounts, and her social connections. Her one-way ticket was to Florida, to a retirement community that catered to indigent elderly residents with no family support. Each package included the same handwritten note. You have 48 hours to disappear. If I ever see any of you again, if you ever contact Aiden or Brooke, if you ever return to this state, the videos of your confessions will be released in their entirety to every news outlet in the country. You will spend the rest of your lives as public symbols of betrayal and fraud. Trevor watched through surveillance cameras as each of them received their packages, their faces reflecting the complete hopelessness of people who'd lost everything and had no path back to their former lives. But Trevor had one final surprise. On the day they were scheduled to leave town, Trevor arranged to be at the bus station, not to threaten or gloat, but to deliver his final message personally. You thought you could steal my life and disappear into your happy ending, he told them, his voice carrying across the nearly empty terminal. Instead, you taught me something important. There are two kinds of people in this world, predators and prey. You spent 20 years thinking I was prey. Now you know better. He handed each of them a final envelope. Inside were bank account numbers for offshore accounts containing $50,000 each, enough money to start over, but not enough to live comfortably. The accounts came with conditions. The money could only be accessed if they remained in their assigned locations and never contacted anyone from their former lives. I'm not a monster, Trevor said. I'm giving you a chance to rebuild. But understand this. I will be watching. I will always be watching. And if you ever try to come back, if you ever try to contact my children, if you ever try to interfere with my life again, those confessions will be the least of your problems. As their buses pulled away, carrying his enemies toward lives of exile and isolation, Trevor felt a deep satisfaction settling into his bones. Justice had been served with surgical precision, leaving no loose ends and no possibility of future threats. The war was over, and Trevor Daniels had won completely. Chapter 9. The New Beginning. 6 months later, Trevor stood in his backyard watching Aiden mow the lawn while Brooke practiced basketball shots against the garage door. The scene looked like ordinary suburban family life, but everything had changed in ways both profound and invisible. The official story was simple. Candace had suffered a nervous breakdown and voluntarily relinquished custody while seeking treatment out of state. Paul had relocated for work opportunities. Eleanor had moved to Florida for retirement. Clean, legal, and completely believable to anyone who didn't know the real story. Aiden and Brooke had initially been devastated by their mother's breakdown and sudden departure, but Trevor had been patient and supportive during their transition. He'd arranged for counseling, maintained their school and social activities, and gradually helped them understand that sometimes people made choices that hurt the people they loved most. The DNA revelation remained Trevor's secret. He decided the children didn't need to know their biological parentage. They'd already lost enough stability, and learning about the deception that had defined their entire lives would serve no constructive purpose. In every way that mattered, Trevor was their father, and they were his children. What the children didn't know was that their mother, Paul, and grandmother were alive and well in their new lives of exile. Candace was actually working as a veterinary assistant in Montana. Trevor had arranged for better employment than the meat processing plant, recognizing that complete destitution would serve no purpose. Paul was managing a small construction crew in Alaska, earning decent money, but living in complete social isolation. Eleanor had found placement in a respectable retirement community in Florida. Her basic needs met, but her former social status permanently destroyed. Trevor received monthly reports on their activities through surveillance networks he maintained. None of them had violated the terms of their exile. None had attempted to contact the children, and none had tried to return to their former lives. They understood the consequences of crossing Trevor Daniels, and they were intelligent enough not to test his patience again. The financial and legal aftermath had been managed with surgical precision. Trevor's lawyers had documented every stolen asset, every fraudulent transaction, every moment of deception his enemies had confessed to. The recovery of his money, combined with damages for emotional distress and fraud, had actually left him wealthier than before the crisis began. More importantly, Trevor had discovered a new business opportunity in his methods. Vincent's security consulting firm had offered him a partnership providing specialized problem resolution services for clients facing similar betrayals. Wealthy individuals who needed complete and permanent solutions to personal or business conflicts that couldn't be handled through conventional legal channels. Trevor had declined the partnership but maintained the relationship. Sometimes problems required solutions that existed outside normal social and legal boundaries, and it was useful to know people who specialized in such work. His auto repair business had expanded significantly, both through his own renewed focus and through contracts he'd acquired when competitors had mysteriously encountered financial difficulties. Trevor now owned 5 shops across the region, each one profitable and each one a testament to what could be accomplished through superior planning and absolute ruthlessness toward one's enemies. But the most significant change was in Trevor himself. The discovery of his wife's betrayal had awakened something that had been dormant since his violent childhood, a complete understanding of his own capacity for strategic thinking and controlled violence. He'd always known he was different from other men, but he'd never fully explored the implications of that difference. Now he understood that he was fundamentally a predator who'd spent 20 years pretending to be a normal suburban family man. The pretense had been comfortable, but ultimately unsustainable. His true nature had reasserted itself when threatened, and he discovered capabilities he'd never imagined he possessed. Trevor's reputation in certain circles had grown considerably. Word had spread among business and social networks about what had happened to people who'd betrayed Trevor Daniels. The details remained secret, but the results were visible to anyone paying attention. 3 people had tried to destroy Trevor's life and had simply disappeared from existence. Other business owners sought Trevor's advice on handling partnership disputes and employee theft. Wealthy individuals facing divorce proceedings asked subtle questions about asset protection and leverage strategies. Trevor provided guidance when asked, but he was careful to maintain plausible deniability about the more extreme methods he'd employed. The message was clear throughout their extended community. Trevor Daniels was not a man to be crossed, betrayed, or underestimated. He was polite, professional, and generous to those who earned his respect. But to those who chose to become his enemies, he was something altogether more dangerous. On this particular evening, as Trevor watched his children playing in the yard of their reclaimed home, he felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with justice. He'd protected his family, recovered his stolen assets, and eliminated threats to his future happiness. Most importantly, he'd established a reputation that would prevent similar betrayals from ever occurring again. Aiden finished mowing and walked over to where Trevor stood on the deck. "Dad," the 16-year-old said, using the title he'd always used but which now carried deeper meaning. "Some guys at school were asking about Mom. What should I tell them?" Trevor put his hand on Aiden's shoulder, feeling the weight of responsibility and love that had defined their relationship since the boy's birth. Whatever genetic connection they lacked was irrelevant compared to the bonds they'd built through 16 years of shared experience. "Tell them your mother is getting the help she needs," Trevor said, "and that you're exactly where you belong." As the sun set over their suburban neighborhood, Trevor Daniels stood with his children and felt something he hadn't experienced in months: perfect peace. His enemies were gone, his family was safe, and his future was secure. He learned something important about himself during the war he'd fought and won. Trevor Daniels was a man who